Yeah, about to begin means it begins now. And if you want, you can get in, sit, and show that you're interested in the session that is going to be the most controversial of the day, the most discussed, and the most important for the ministers who are listening somewhere, and they will put our ideas as multi-stakeholder assembly in their thinking. I'm sure about that. So, if nobody else is getting in, let's start. Our panel is a really important panel for discussing about Datafication. The word just is an invention to say that we have a society that is full of data, an economy that is based on data, a culture that is transforming itself in some kind of data processing, and this leads us to more efficiency, but also a set of problems. The free flow of data information is very important for the internet. The internet is open. The internet, in my words, and not mine only, is neutral. It's also about collaboration, conversation, and data is gathered all around. I'm talking just to let people get in further. So, given that, we also know that what we know about people is important for their lives. What governments know about people, what companies know about people, the asymmetry of what is known about our life. And also, we are introducing new technologies that gather more and more data with the Internet of Things mantra. So, the discussion is about the fact that we want efficiency, we want privacy, we want free speech, we want copyright, we want a lot of things that sometimes seem to be contradictory. Let's have a discussion about that, and let's have a really multi-stakeholder discussion about that with John Frank, who is Vice President EU and Government Affairs in Microsoft. Please welcome him. Then we have Tashinori Tajiura, who chairs the Global Strategy Working Group Committee on Information and Telecommunication Policy at Kaidan Ren, the Association of Japanese Industry. Then Rob Sherman, Deputy Chief Privacy Officer at Facebook. And Sally Shipman Wentworth, Vice President of Global Policy Development at the Internet Society. Thank you very much for being here. And we introduced the whole thing in words that will be much more knowledgeable than mine with Victor Meyer-Schönberger. He is the professor that wrote the biggest bestsellers on big data that we know, and he is also in Oxford looking at policy for the managing of data. So yeah, let's welcome Victor Meyer-Schönberger.
All right, I'm very grateful, Luca, for your kind words. I'll try to be brief and to the point, which is hard when you talk about datafication. Now, in the morning, Andy Wyckoff reminded us that a lot of people look at data and digitization and think of yet another tool in their toolbox. to enhance efficiency and so forth. But he said we can do better than that, we can do more than that. And particularly today on this Monday morning after the German elections that brought a very right-wing party back into parliament, I think there is a point in time to say, yes, data actually does do much more than just enhance efficiency. In fact, for me, and I hope after my short presentation for you, data and datafication is not so much about driving efficiency forward than about providing a new perspective on reality, a new perspective on the world. And in that sense, datafication and what is driving it is trying not so much to make things faster or cheaper, but to make them better, to give us insights into the world, a better understanding of how the world works, and therefore be, in a way, a new reincarnation of a movement that started in Europe some hundreds of years ago and that we call the Enlightenment. Datafication to me is nothing but Enlightenment 2.0, where through a better perspective on reality, we actually can make better decisions. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, better decision making. Whether it's in the private sector, whether it's in the individual side, or whether it's in the public sector. Every day we face decisions between A and B. And when we decide, we can base it on our intuition. We can base it on our ideology. But Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate for economics, has shown that this is a bad choice. And we are much better off basing our decisions on facts, even in the age of alternative facts. And facts are just data. So data drives our ability in this Enlightenment 2.0 age to make sense of the world. And you're going to say to me, but wait a minute, Victor, isn't that what we have been doing all along? And you're right. Since the very beginning of time, we have looked at the world and tried to understand it, observing and understanding it. That's what we have been doing all along. And that is nothing but data generation, data collection, and data analysis. So what's new? Well, throughout the ages, we have collected and analyzed data, but we also knew that collecting and analyzing data is hard and time-consuming and costly. And so you know what we did? We designed methods and processes, our entire universe of understanding the world, by knowing that we have only little data available and that we need to squeeze the most meaning out of the least amount of data. We understood and took for granted that we live in a small data world. But what if that changes? What if data is pervasive and everywhere and comprehensive? Then we may have to rethink how we make sense of the world. And we'll soon have to, because the data in the world is exploding. The best guesstimate that we have is that from 1987 to 2007, data in the world grew 100-fold in 20 years. If you go back in human history to the last time that happened, historians tell us we have to go back to 1455 to 1505 when data in 50 years doubled. And here in 20 years we have a 100-fold increase. Now, let me tell you or give you a bit of a presentation of what this means and why this is important. For this, I'm doing an experiment here, and take out my camera. Once it was a smartphone, but actually it's a camera, you know that. So I take a photograph of you. Could you please all smile? Oh, come on back there, please, give me a smile. Thank you. Now, as I made this photograph, I had to make a very important decision. The decision was, do I focus on the first row? Then you're going to be blurry. Or do I focus on you back there, and then you in the first row are blurry? In other words, as I take the photograph, that is, as I collect data, I already need to know what questions I want to answer. But what if I don't? then I can't go back in time, then I have the wrong data and I will forever regret it. Like in this image of a beautiful toothbrush in the foreground, perfectly crisp, and unfortunately completely blurry in the background, my then 3-year-old son. My wife is still holding that photograph against me. And actually that's a lie, because that photograph is not an ordinary photograph. That photograph is actually taken with a big data or datafication camera called a light field camera or LITRO. And what it means is that as I have this photograph on my computer, I can just click on my son and he comes into focus. Because not just one focal plane and a small sample of data is present, but the entire data set is present. And what does this do? Well, think about how we make sense of the world. Currently, we have a question, we get data, and then we answer the question. That's great. It works well. It's called scientific progress. But you know what? It depends on one crucial assumption, and that is, are we asking the right question? Because if we are asking the wrong question, we get the data, we do the analysis, but the answer will not help us. Some of us surely are answering the right question and asking it, but I fall more into the role of this gentleman who has the wrong hypothesis about how the world works. So datafication enables us to start with the data rather than with a concrete question, and then out of the analysis of it, drive a new question, a question we didn't even know that we should ask. Give you an example of a company and an app on the smartphone that you can download for free called Duolingo. Who knows Duolingo? Very good. Helps you learn a foreign language, right? Now, because all of the data of interacting with the app is kept and captured, and there are dozens of millions of people every single day that use Duolingo, Duolingo has a lot of data about actual language learners. So a few years back, they did some pattern analysis, looking for a new, unusual pattern in the data. And they found a very unusual pattern that signified that Spanish native speakers learned English the wrong way. That is, they learn it just fine, and then they get up to a particular lesson that introduces a grammatical concept, and many of them just drop out. If you change the lesson in the sequence, the success rate goes through the roof. Now, that means that Duolingo is the best way to learn English if you're a Spanish speaker, but that's not my point here. My point is, why are my colleagues at Oxford University not coming up with this insight? Are they too stupid? No, I hope not. But they don't have the data. And so the beauty of data is that we can use it now in the age of datafication to stimulate new questions, not just to answer existing ones. That's the new perspective, and that will drive new, better decision making. But that means also that data's value changes significantly. In the past, we had a question, we got the data, we answered the question, we threw the data out. It fulfilled its purpose. In the future, we'll understand that data is like an iceberg, where we have only captured so far what is above the waterline. But by reusing the data over and over again, we can actually capture the value, the hidden value in the data that's below the waterline. But that also means that we now need to capture data when we can, not just when we need it. You all know the Google self-driving car, I'm sure. It's a little cute for my taste. But how good is it in autonomously driving? See, a lot of car companies in Europe, as well as in Asia and America, are building autonomous driving cars. How well are they operating? Well, here is a graph that shows the distance that a self-driving car drives to a next human intervention in 2015. If you take the average of car makers, established car makers, it's 400 kilometers before a human intervention is necessary. For a Google car, it's 2,000 kilometers. 5 times better. Why? Because most traditional car makers have optimized the sensors and the use of data on their cars for cost. Google has not. They have used all the sensors that they can and then some. They collect and analyze per car, per second, 1 billion data points because they innovate and they optimize for innovation rather than optimize for cost. Now, when you look at that self-driving car, I want you to understand that the change is larger than just this cute car. If we have autonomous driving cars that we can share, it means, my colleagues at LSE have shown, that we will need 30% fewer parking spaces in cities, which means a huge opportunity for urban planning. Or think about medical field. If I have a cold like I do today and I take an aspirin, I make a huge mistake. I either take too much or too little of aspirin. Why? Because aspirin was designed for an average cold by an average man. And so my cold is not average, and of course I'm not an average man. Therefore I take too little or too much. But why am I so crazy in doing the wrong thing? Because I don't know better, because I don't have the data. That we can change and personalize and individualize health. Or think about education. Why is it that all of our children need to learn not just the same thing, but the same thing the same way? Even though they're all different human beings and clothe and express themselves differently. Why are we treating them all like they're the same? Because we don't have the data. With datafication, we can change that, but that means we also need to look at the regulatory framework for this change. This is not about efficiency primarily. This is about understanding the world and gaining better insights from it. But for that, we don't need a regulatory framework around privacy. We need to go beyond privacy. Privacy isn't the issue here. What is the issue here is the changing role of data. Who has access to the data? Who benefits from the data? Are markets of data competitive? Where is innovation generated? And if innovation is generated by data, who has access to that data and who doesn't? If we don't find an answer to the question of a regulatory framework, datafication will only empower the powerful and leave us behind. I think we need to do better than that. Thank you.
Yeah, I know I told you to shorten your speech, but this part was exactly the part that we wanted to listen, so maybe you will go back to that when in the next part of the speech. So, the controversial panel is about to start. I'll tell you also that I'm also getting notes because I will be the rapporteur at the end of the day, so I need to sit to take notes when they speak and then go back up when I have to speak, so forgive me. John Frank from Microsoft, what's your take? It's about optimizing for innovation, but are we asking the right questions?
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak today. I have some slides that, I want to just talk about why industry is concerned about the free flow of data across borders and the issues of enabling data to move around in a world where we still have laws and international law based upon Westphalian systems of borders, and yet in the data world and the commercial world today, the reality is evolving rapidly. And so this is just an example of why data needs to move around. Now this is the Boeing 787 showing the different parts made in different countries. Supply chains today extend around the globe. And for those parts to all fit together, people need to be able to work together. And these parts need to be maintained together. And so in an era of business being distributed literally around the world, we need systems, data systems, that can work around the world as well. I want to tell a brief story about Rolls-Royce, a company that makes jet turbine engines. And they've had sensors in their jet turbines for a number of years, but recently they came to us and said, we're not sure what to do with all this data. And so they sat down with our data scientist and tried to work on what can we tell from this data, how do we sort out signal from noise, and our data scientists working with them, answering the questions that they thought were important to ask, looking back at that data, again, kind of like that camera, using scoping in and out, what can we tell with this data? And Rolls-Royce was able to greatly enhance the maintenance of their turbine engines by being able to predict when a part might fail prematurely. And so that's really helpful because in the airline business, airplanes on the ground is generally a bad thing. But we were able to do much more than that. And so this is a chart showing a group of airlines from managed by Rolls-Royce, where their engines in real time are moving around the world. Now, they're mobile. Sometimes the same jet will be in Europe or America or South America or Asia. And whenever they land, there's certain data they can download and be transmitted to data centers where it can be analyzed for a variety of things. But the really interesting thing is when you can start using this data to tell airlines how to reduce fuel costs. And actually what they found is they can reduce fuel consumption by up to 4% using the data analytics that come off the machines. Now, companies initially moved to the cloud, and cloud computing we talk about because it's cheaper. Rather than maintain their own infrastructure, it's cheaper, simpler, and lets their IT department focus on higher value services. But beyond cost, people are finding that cloud computing can be more secure than they can be themselves. And really the magic comes when they can plug into the advanced analytics and advanced services so that they don't have to understand how artificial intelligence and analytics works. They can just know what questions to ask. And so we're seeing enterprises move to the cloud, big and small, and there's a tremendous opportunity for small enterprises because now you don't need $20 million of computer equipment to get into business. You need a credit card. And whether it's web services from a variety of companies, you can get the most advanced technology available with bring your own data, and the services are yours. So, government policy in this area, talking about the legal framework. I want to talk about just very quickly, I'll call prohibitions against data flows and inhibitions. And I think that we've been working through some of these, but bank regulators are concerned about national banks moving to the cloud and their data being stored outside their borders. And I think it's been a positive experience for regulators, technology companies, and banks working through these issues, realizing the key thing is not where the data sits, the key thing is that the data is available. And whether the data is in a different country or not isn't really the issue. And so we've worked with regulators and banks to get them comfortable with the idea that availability of data is enhanced through cloud computing. And I think it's a good model for trying to understand what the core issue is and how best to address it. Now, national security concerns are also mentioned, and there's going to be some category of data that national governments are going to want to keep on their country. But the key thing is to reduce it down as much as possible. The UK has done an especially good job initially with data classification and setting up standards so that they can have a smart way to manage data and ensuring that the core data that they need to keep on their national territory does, but by and large, they can manage the risk well. Government data is challenging because of going back to that territorial sovereignty of the Westphalian system. A quick story, I met earlier this year with one of the senior leaders of the Flemish government. Belgium is divided into 2 regions, and so the Flemish government has a great deal of government services that are delivered in Belgium. And they told me they wanted to move to the cloud, and the primary data center would be in Flanders, but the backup data would be across the border in the Netherlands. And because the theoretical risk that the Dutch government would have access to their data, they couldn't do it. Now, I don't know how interested the Dutch government is in that data, but it points to a real risk and concern that people want to manage that tail risk. And again, we're going to need to engage in a discussion and dialogue about how to address that so that governments can feel comfortable. And it's not just governments, it's organizations as well. A major inhibition to governments moving across border is, this is a search warrant for an account of an email that issued by a US court for email stored in Dublin. But it's the cross-border nature of lawful access orders, and it's also giving people, organizations, assurances that their data in a post-Snowden world, they can have confidence that their data won't be accessed. So this is an area where we need to work out a legal framework that works for law enforcement, but also works for governments as customers and organizations. So we can build these solutions through dialogues. Today's just a quick overview of some of the issues that we see, but data needs to move around. And the best way to achieve these things is through international cooperation, precisely because the data doesn't have borders, but we live in a world that does have borders. And so I think the G7 is an especially important group to raise these issues and to make progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if they do a good job. We'll see it in 2 days. But it was fun to listen to your presentation after having asked, are we asking the right question? And in Rolls-Royce, the question was, what do we do with the data? That was interesting. In any case, on the same line, probably, Kajura is going to tell us about how industry is gathering data and what are they doing with that data. And I also ask you to keep short presentations because we started with 20 minutes delay. It's their fault, it's not our fault, but we have more panels after us. Please.
So, thank you, Chairman. And I will explain the environment of the new digital services. But similar thing of the Frank Sands, I will cut the such pages. So, Japanese industry is also concerned that almost 20 years the machine data, cross-border machine data. Then that called now the IoT data. IDC says that IoT data will grow so much. And especially cross industries data will hopeful for the new services and the societies. And then cross industries mean the connected car and the small smart buildings and so on. I explain you the connected cars benefit. Then connected car will also increases then, so much, and almost all car will be connected to internet in 2035. Then several data is usable, the government and some organizations. So what service? And now we can use IoT connected car data to automated driving and telematics insurance and so on. And I hope that many new services will come to use the IoT connected car data. Then I want to explain you that there are many issues to consider when creating a society which processes digital innovation and services. When there is a difference in the classification data and an implication and system of a unit for every manufacturer, an overall analysis and standardized service can be performed. The strengthening and advancement of cybersecurity is also an issue. This is the next panel. It is our duty to be very aware of privacy protection in the case of utilization of data, in anonymizing technology and others. Data will come from all over the world and feedback provided globally. It isn't ideal that different regulation exists for every country. In terms of expanding data utilization and related new services, cross-border data flow grew 45 times from 2006 to 2014, according to McKinsey. McKinsey is referring to its economic effort and also says that the effect of the data flow increase resulted in $2.8 trillion GDP increase for the global economy in 2014. The internet is borderless. If we make a border wall in it, we will no longer to be able to achieve such economic effort. And then, for example, I want to explain you the effect of cross-border data flow generally. We Japanese industries export several products as like Rolls-Royce, and such as the power plant and construction machine, trains, and factory automation systems. The product systems are working all over the world. Service-side industries can get digital machine data not only inside but also around. Service-side get machine data such as position, operation, condition, and so on. Service-side analysis is of data with researcher, engineer, designer, and marketers. The raw data changes to information, intelligence, and the knowledge. Field side can get operational advice, preventive maintenance, and any crime data, anti-crime data. For example, the construction machine user can operate the machine appropriately and avoid a sudden breakdown, theft, and abuse. The service side industries get effects such as productivity improvement, reduction of cost of maintenance, and so on. Cross-border data flows have positive economic effort on both field side and industries and service side industries. Business should create the interoperability. Business side industries should create interoperability of product and systems, strengthen cybersecurity, and promote privacy protection in order to make societies which possesses digital innovation and services. We'd like to ask each each government to decide on the ways of the harmonization of the international regulation for data. Ensure that cross-border data flows make public sector data available and encourage them to use it for the benefit for the creators and citizens. When these conditions are complete, a participant appears on strong startup entrepreneurs and many small and medium enterprises from a new, different type of businesses. And the whole market should be advanced. New service and additional value will come. We believe that harnessing the digital economy through data utilization, the way to get both society satisfaction, complete, and economic growth. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That was perfect final words for introducing the next speaker, because we really want both economic growth and social sustainability. If we just have one of them, we have problems. And we have growing problem in an exponential rate, as Victor just told us. So, Rob Sherman from Facebook. You're here not as the Chief Efficiency Officer, but the Chief Privacy Officer. Deputy, but it's okay. So what's your take? Society or economics, or how to make society and economics work?
Well, I think it's a really important question. I'm glad we're talking about it, and it's unsurprisingly probably something that we at Facebook spend a lot of time thinking about. And you know, if you think about what we at Facebook are here to do, what we're trying to accomplish, you know, we operate a social network, but fundamentally, what we're trying to do is build services that give people the power to build communities and bring the world closer together. And both of these things, innovation, economic growth on the one hand, privacy protection, speech protections on the other hand, these are both really critical to doing that. So part of this is intuitive. If we don't build technology, there's no technology to use. But the reality is that if people don't feel like they're in control of their information, that they decide what they're sharing, they decide who's seeing what they choose to share, then they're not going to be comfortable using Facebook. And so that's an important part of everything that we do. And I think it's fundamental not just to the way that Facebook works, but as we're thinking about this concept of datafication, how do we make sure that we're achieving the benefits that the previous speakers talked about and doing it in a way that empowers people and actually brings people to the place where they can achieve some of these benefits themselves. And so Luca talked about, he said that this was going to be a controversial panel, and I think maybe we haven't been sufficiently controversial yet. So I thought what I might do in just the next couple of minutes is talk about three areas where, I think as industry, as a policy community, we're getting it wrong, or maybe to put a finer point on it, where we're leaving value on the table. And with this idea of datafication, we can be creating more value. And so the three areas I want to talk about are really thinking about people and putting people at the center of our decision making about this, leveraging technology and data to create value in real people's lives, and then avoiding the situation where we create these artificial barriers to the kind of communication and the kind of value that we're ultimately trying to create. So on this first one, focusing on people, all of us have been through this experience where we've tried to install something on our phones, and we've gotten this terms of service agreement or a privacy policy, and you've had to click consent. I won't poll the room to ask how many of you have read those closely. I'm confident everybody's read them very closely before installing. But the reality is, when we think about privacy at Facebook, or when we think about privacy in terms of the broader world, we should be thinking about the way that people experience using their information, people experience communicating. And that's probably the most challenging part of what we do, what I and my team do at Facebook, because not everybody's the same. right? So we have different people who are using information in different ways. Certainly we are a global service and we have people in different countries around the world who have different preferences about privacy and about their data, but individual people choose to use Facebook differently, right? So I share on Facebook, I post pictures of my little kids all the time, and I choose to share them with my friends. If you're a journalist, you probably have articles that you're posting publicly and that you want to share broadly. And so data is something that can help us solve this problem too. So just as an example, we were in a survey of people across many of the countries that use Facebook and asked them a simple question. Who do you want to see the things that you're posting? And so my instinct as a privacy person who's paid to think about privacy every day is like, let's make that as limited as possible. Turns out globally, half the people that we asked wanted to share publicly. And so we had to make a decision that empowered those people to do that while having a default rule, while making it that limited who could see things if people didn't make a choice. So the way it works on Facebook now is if you just create an account today, only your friends will see what you share, but we actually ask you to make a choice. Who do you want to see the things that you're sharing? And then coming out of that, we obviously have a privacy policy. We encourage everybody to read it, but we want to make sure that when people understand how their information is being used, that it's intuitive from the way that they use our services. So you'll see things like the choice of who sees what you're posting as you're posting. You'll see when you see an ad, we'll explain why you're seeing that ad. Why did we decide to show you that particular ad? A lot of things like that. We're building more services that help people share in different ways. So with groups and private messages, increasingly time-limited sharing. So you can choose to send a message that only lives for an hour or post something that only lives for 24 hours because those are additional ways that people want to share. So that's part of it. But the other piece of this is really about creating value. And I think this is candidly something that I, given my background, came a little bit later to because, the idea of using datafication, not just for the sake of innovation, although innovation is critically important for all of our economies, but also using innovation to enrich individual people's lives. That's hard to do. That's hard to apply the technological innovation and actually make people's lives better. And it's hard to do it, from my perspective, in a privacy protective way. So I want to just give two very quick examples of how we've been thinking about this at Facebook. The first is safety checks. Some of you may be familiar with a service that we offer in the event of natural disasters, where you can very quickly, if you're in an area affected by a disaster, let your friends know that you're okay, or if you need to get help, you can connect with other people who can provide help to you. So these are really valuable things, and I think we've unfortunately been in an environment where we've had a lot of these disasters recently, and it's been really helpful, particularly in areas where traditional methods of communication haven't worked, in bringing people together. But what we realized is actually the data that comes from that can help with disaster response. And one of the big challenges if you're a disaster responder is in the couple of hours, in the 48 hours or so after a disaster, you actually don't have very granular information about where the greatest needs are. And so by aggregating the data that we get from Safety Check and other sources, we can actually give aggregated privacy protective information to disaster responders to help them actually save lives at a time when that's really challenging from a data perspective. Another example, and we're talking about sort of the cross-border nature of data, and I think that was in a lot of the work that Microsoft is doing, something that came through there. One of the things that we can do is use data to break down barriers. And so we've been using machine learning technologies at Facebook to help build machine translation and object recognition technologies. So just as an example, if I speak English and I'm trying to converse with somebody who speaks Italian, we don't speak each other's languages, we can actually train computers to translate so that when I consume an Italian speaker's conversation, I consume it in English, I can respond in English, and that person will receive what I'm sharing back in Italian. Something that was, is pretty commonplace and is something that many people who communicate globally on Facebook do every day, and is just something that really was not technologically possible before. We're doing the same thing for accessibility for blind people, where we're able to train computers to recognize common things like water or a tree or a pizza in images, and rather than just experiencing Facebook as Rob shared a photo, John shared a photo, Jane shared a photo, people are actually able to use this technology and a lot of data under the hood to understand what the photos that their friends are sharing with them. So that's really very powerful and really important, and I think I'm excited about the promise of that. But that's another thing that when we think of datafication, I think about it really as a responsibility to create real value in real people's lives, not just this theoretical impact. And then the last thing I want to talk about is sort of these artificial barriers or the understanding the importance of free flow of data. We've been doing this survey recently that we call the Future of Business Survey, and it's looking at SMEs on Facebook. And now we're looking, I think we've surveyed something like 140,000 SMEs across 33 countries globally. And we look at how they use Facebook, but also ask them questions about their business, how they're feeling about their business. And we see these trends that, for the people in this room may not be surprising, but what we see is that businesses that are doing business globally, that are engaged in international trade and that communicate globally, are growing faster, are more confident, and are creating more jobs locally than businesses that don't do that. And so we see that not just from the perspective of individual people who communicate, but from the perspective of economic growth and business, this is really important. So how does this translate to policy? Well, I think we're seeing lots of questions about free flow of information, about data transfer across borders or data localization. And I think when we think about that, there are a lot of models to follow. Here in Europe, there's been a lot of work on the General Data Protection Regulation. And that's in part an effort to create a standardized framework across Europe. So if you're a business that's trying to share data within Europe, you have consistent standards. There's going to be a lot of work on adequacy and understanding how data can be transferred out of Europe into other countries. And so that's one model. Another model, if you look at places like Canada, where they don't have the same concept, but instead say, if you are a Canadian business that wants to transfer data, if you're transferring it somewhere else, you're responsible for maintaining the integrity of that data, making sure that it has adequate privacy protections. And then in Asia, we're looking at CBPRs and a regional framework that we're starting to see gain traction. So there are a lot of different models. The one that I think is really challenging, and John alluded to this too, is the idea of data localization, where we create mandatory limits on transferring data and say all data from this country has to live in this place, or all data, a copy of all data that was created here has to stay here so that we create jurisdiction. These are things that are nominally done in the name of privacy. I think it's questionable whether they have concrete value for individual people's privacy on the ground. But at the end of the day, we have this map at Facebook that looks at how people are using our service, and fundamentally more than anything else, it looks at the connections that people create. And fundamentally more than anything else, what you see in this map is international communication. People are communicating across borders every day. That's sort of the fundamental thing that Facebook does. And so, one of the things when we think about individual people and how they use our services, how they communicate today in today's world, it really is a global thing. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to be optimistic about the potential for datafication, but also the potential for datafication in a global way. And I think discussions like this that involve multi-stakeholder panels and multi-stakeholder discussions are a really important way of moving from the place where we sort of have these national frameworks to something that's global and more broad, and that actually enables us to get to what Luca, you described at the beginning of creating and enjoying the benefits of data while also making sure that we guard against some of the challenges that we need to keep in mind.
Thank you very much, Rob. Yeah, we are not controversial enough because we have no time. But if I had time, I would ask, and I will ask Sally to help me, if we are satisfied with this first round of discussion, because yes, data is very good, is an iceberg, is a new enlightenment, or can bring us to there. But who is doing this is just some companies. Your company is very good at doing this. Italians and Japanese do cars, do things. They are a different kind of economy. But there are also other countries in the world for talking about global issues. So we are talking about the Western countries, which is a minority in the world. So there are many issues. Is this going to be done just by some big companies in the West and they are not linked to the Chinese or other countries. Is this going to be just a phase in the development of the internet? We used to think at the internet in a different way. It was a neutral network of many companies that started, failed, did many things, people, and it was not very much about big companies. So, is there something that we lost, Sally, or is there something that we are just starting to understand that we need to conquer?
Thank you, and I guess it's my role to be controversial. I don't know if I'll play that role or not.
I'm sorry about that. But your background is usable for that.
Okay. Well, I think that there's been a sort of interesting progression in this discussion from a more abstract view of data and how it's driving the economy and driving technology. And as we progressed into, what does this mean for the consumer? And I think one of the things perhaps that I can bring to this from the Internet Society's point of view is this notion that data, particularly when it relates to the end user, and as you said, we've shifted our view of the internet over the years. We come from a point of view at the Internet Society that this is about a user-centric internet. So there is certainly a user point of view that needs to be brought to bear in all of this. And what we've heard so far are the very real benefits of this data-driven economy and technology mindset that we're moving into, the ability of data to move around the globe to benefit our lives, to benefit our societies. But there is a point at which the collection of data from us as users means that we are engaged in a value exchange. I am bringing something to the table as an end user, and it is being processed by either a company or a government or another entity or research institution. I do think there are more players in the internet space than just the companies. And I think at times we lose sight of that notion of this being a value exchange. And certainly from an end user perspective, there is a sense increasingly that this data-driven world is moving so quickly with all of these big players and all of these decisions being made, and that we have lost control of the situation in some way or another. That our data is being collected either explicitly or implicitly, and of course with the Internet of Things, it will be collected from us in ways that are deeply, deeply personal. And how do we retain some measure of control in this exchange? How do we recover the value back to us that we are handing over in order to achieve all of these other bigger benefits that we agree are essential? And so I think that there's an important element of this that often gets lost when we use big words like datafication. It sounds like something that's out there, it's separate from me. And we need to bring back to the conversation what it means for the end user to hand over this information for it to be processed to produce all of these benefits. And there's this sense, I got a call the other day from a relative during this most recent data breach in the United States. And the question was, well, what am I supposed to do? And the answer increasingly is not a lot you can do. And that is discouraging. It creates, I think, the backlash that we start to see around the world. And I think it's something that the companies and others need to take very, very seriously in, as we collect this information, what is our responsibility back to the end user? So I think things that we would argue for, particularly for all data handlers, are things like increased accountability. That the costs of these breaches that are becoming more and more part of our lives not simply be borne by me or by my family member who may or may not have had a choice in the transaction. that we think of the collection of data as an ethical responsibility. The holding, the protection, the treatment of that data is not arbitrary. It has impact on real people. And there will be real life impacts of these data breaches. And so I want to introduce into the conversation as we go from the broad economic impacts, the benefits for industry, the vast opportunities perhaps that big data and other things present, not to lose sight of the very real aspect that it is my information. It is information about my child, or about my health, or about my driving patterns, or about my electricity usage. All of that is deeply, deeply personal. So the protection of it has to be in line with that expectation. And I think I worry a bit that in the dialogue we have today, if we get too abstract, we lose that element that says there is a value exchange, and I as an end user need to have more opportunity to provide meaningful consent, hold data handlers accountable, and not really just be left, to the wolves, so to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew we needed that, and Victor was here also for having us reflect and think more deeply about what it means. There is a sort of growing consciousness about this thing. It's not only in society. Facebook said our users are not comfortable if they don't feel in control. So it was saying something that was similar to what you were saying from a company point of view. So it seems possible to go towards a solution in these contradictions, which are contradictions. Security and privacy, efficiency and possibility of using technologies all around the world without the artificial barriers. So there are problems. I took notes of all of them. I will bring them to the wrap-up session afterwards. But the time is already gone. And so from now on, we are going through a time limit. So we need to be very fast for the next part of the session. And also, I would like very much to know if there is somebody who wants to say something that is very urgent to be said now, because first questions should come from the audience. They should be very few and very short and very sharp. If there are, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 2. No more than 2. I'm myopic. I don't see very well, so I see there are 2. 2 is good. Let's take them. Please be fast, and we go ahead. I'll have some more questions, and then we have another round for everybody. Please, the 2 questions.
Hello, I'm Jan Kriva. I'm working for the French Digital Council, Multistakeholder Commission. I have a question to Mr. Meyer-Schönberger. We talked a lot during this panel about cross-border free flow of data, even though there are actually very few legal provisions for data localization. But in your speech, you talked a lot about how we can distribute the knowledge that is gained by data. And from this, I understand that there's also an issue of cross-platform or cross-actor data flows and how we give access to different businesses, to individuals to this data. So I would like to know how you understand free flow of data and what should be the regulatory framework for this situation. Thank you.
Thank you. It was the end of his presentation that he's going to give us. Are we asking the right questions and are we doing enough? The second question is over there.
Thank you. My name is Sandra Hoferichter. I'm the Secretary General of the EuroDIC, the European Dialogue on Internet Governance, which is a multi-stakeholder process here in Europe. And just to promote a little bit, if you are interested, you will find the messages from our last event outside of this building. My question, Viktor Meyer-Schönberger's last sentence was kind of a warning. There is a risk that we empower the powerful and leave us behind. In this respect, Microsoft has made a proposal to establish a digital Geneva Convention, and sort of an international treaty, a set of binding agreements between the nations. I would like to know from the panel, and especially from Microsoft and also from Facebook, how you think this proposal, or how you think such a Geneva Digital Convention could relate to the multi-stakeholder model, which would include all communities, all stakeholders, academia, technical community, and the civil society, so that we can actually avoid giving power to the powerful and have the feeling we are left behind.
Thank you very much. So let's go back to the panel. The questions are very hard. What do we say to the ministers about this? Is it a sort of the metaphor? What's the metaphor that we need to use? It's an army metaphor, so we need a Geneva Convention, or is an ecology of the media ecology metaphor that we need? So we need a Kyoto Convention. Victor.
It's very hard to summarize all of that.
Yeah, but you are the professor. You're the
and
one who knows.
I know. And to add something new to it, to me, it's not about war and it's not about the economy. It's about the future of humanity. And I mean that as I say it, given the choices that we have made over the last couple of years in putting people in powerful places who are not so enamored with looking at evidence and facts. I think what is at stake is for us as humans to make the right decisions when it comes to global phenomena like global warming. When we cannot have an open, direct, transparent, and intense discussion about these kind of challenges that we all face as humanity, then we are at risk as a species. And so, to me, therefore, data localization, data flow, our intellectual property protection, privacy protection are all important issues. And in many of these issues, I think we need to heed the value, but we need to shift to a different mechanism of protection. For example, I don't believe that individuals should be in control of their data because they can't. It's too complicated. And if we continue that illusion that people could be in control of their data and exercise that control, we're kidding ourselves, and it only helps the powerful. But that's a particular point. I think there we need new mechanisms. But I'm less worried about that. I'm more worried fundamentally about our ability at this point in time to take the insights that we can gain from data and to have an inspired but a fact-based conversations about it that is open and that is transparent, and where we can share the data that is the foundation of our arguments. Because if we fail on that note, if we fail on facing and having a discussion about the most important issues of humankind, we might not exist as a species.
Thank you, Victor. And it's true, and it's something that we follow. And the link between the ecology of the word and the ecology of the media is a link that we should think deeper and deeper, because there is a strategy to deal with the ecology of the world that we learned in 50 years that we should think about to deal with the ecology of the media. Let's have a last sentence from the rest of the panel, but with a different tone. What am I going to give to the internet to make it more sustainable in terms of ecology of the media? Would you like to do that? Frank.
We need to create an internet that's safer for civilians. And so the Digital Data Convention proposal is one to establish norms for government that they won't attack civilians in times of peace. The second prong of it is that industry should have norms about what it does, and so at Microsoft, 100% defense, 0% offense. A third aspect is to increase the scientific information about who is conducting cyber attacks on civilians so that we can create disincentives for it. So it's an important set of issues that we need everyone's input on. It's a long-term project, but I think it's an essential cornerstone to having a secure internet for us all.
And that will be the next session issue to go deeper. Please, Toshinori, please.
I think the most important thing is trust of internet. Then the method is today's theme, open and safe and so on. Then, but the industry also makes such an effort. But trust is a final issue of society. Then the government and the industries and also consumers discuss and open discuss and make trust. I think, and of course, that discussion will be globally. This time, as like this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob.
I think as we think about, Victor made the point about the future of our society, and I think a lot of that is what's at stake here. I mean, I think, businesses need to think about this, all of us need to think about this together as an issue of people and empowering people and making sure that we are doing the right thing by the people that we serve. And I think from Facebook's perspective and certainly from industry's perspective, that means thinking hard about the technology that we're building and the data that we're using, making sure that we're understanding what the values are and how we can create as much value for people as possible, but also understanding how technology might be used in negative ways and avoiding that. We have an obligation, I think, all of us as a society to work together to think about those things and to work with experts outside of companies, outside of government, to understand what are the challenges and how do we achieve that. And I think all of us, policymakers, industry, everyone, need to resist the temptation for easy answers and to say, oh, we'll just get people to consent for that, or we'll just have a very, a policy that says this, or we'll have a barrier to transfer, and actually grapple with what are the outcomes that we want to achieve, and what in the positive side, what is the positive future that we think data can create. And I think working together we will achieve that, but we do need to work together to get there.
Thank you, Rob. Sally.
So you referred to this as the ecology. At the Internet Society, we think of the internet ecosystem and this notion that no one actor in the ecosystem can take decisions that are alone, that don't have implications, or to say it positively, every actor's actions in the internet have implications for others in the ecosystem. And so we have to think of it that way. And I think to Rob's point, the notion that there's an easy button somewhere that we push and it gets secure or privacy is protected is both unrealistic and perhaps even dangerous. The value of the internet is in the global exchange of information and ideas in ways that empower humans across the world. And we need to I think, be careful to make these decisions in a way that preserves that value and preserves this notion of empowerment.
Thank you, Sally. We had to rush because you guys took too long to come back from lunch. So we did it faster than it was needed to develop such an important argument. But I hope you had the sensation that it's not an easy issue to be dealt with, and it's a very important issue for the future of humanity. Now, this was the most controversial, so you saw there was not that much controversy, but next comes the most frightening panel. Have it now.